Well, you probably no doubt heard by now, there is a significant spike in temperatures coming our way. Our first legitimate heat wave of this summer is literally starting on July 1st, by the way. How's that for timing? But we can watch the progression of the heat over the next few days on the visualization that shows us how this will play out. But there are so many details on this that we need to parse out to make sure you're ready for this. Like what the temperatures are going to be for your part of the bay. Because it's going to be different. It's going to be wildly different from one part of the bay to the other, as it so often is. So I want to take as much time as I can here to give you an overview on how this will impact you, and also kind of clear up some of the details on why it's the duration of what could be coming our way over the next week and a half that may matter even more than the specific daytime highs, which we're going to look at over the course of the next several minutes here together. By now, hopefully you've gotten used to watching the visualization of the heat kind of migrating over California. I've been showing this a lot over the last several weeks. That takes us to Wednesday. But to drive the point home on the long-term duration of what's coming our way from this, we're going to take that from July 3rd and we're going to let the model go even longer. We're going to put it into the long-range model run, so it's going to go faster, and I'm just going to let it go. And each day, we kind of see the same pattern holding steady. And that went all the way ahead to Tuesday, July 9th. Now, that is not to say that we're going to be under the kind of intense temperatures that we're about to experience on Tuesday and Wednesday, which we're going to see in a second. It's not going to stay that hot through July 9th. But why I wanted you to see this was so that we can get an early pickup on the long duration of temperatures staying well above average for quite some time, even if we get through the worst of the heat. Initially, we're never really going to be completely out of this, at least not probably for the next week or maybe more. The other thing to talk about is the update in wording on this. So if you've been paying attention to the forecast, for the last several days, we've been talking about an excessive heat watch. And now we're calling it an excessive heat warning. Why is that? What's the difference? And that all comes down to the nuance of timing and the messaging that the National Weather Service uses. So just to bring you up to speed on that, we've been calling it an excessive heat watch for the last several days because the event itself was still several days out. When they changed the terminology from watch to warning, what's happening is they're letting you know, all right, look, we've been watching this. We were looking at it in the forecast. We were adjusting the numbers. We were pretty confident, but not guaranteed. But now that it's a warning, we are guaranteed, and this is about to happen. That's the only difference here. The forecast hasn't really changed all that much in terms of the numbers, but the timing has changed. This is about to hit us really starting tomorrow, and the degree of confidence now is so high that when you hear warning, they're telling you that this is happening or it is about to happen. That's the difference. So let's go back now to our excessive heat warning. You see it's covering pretty much the entire bay, with one little exception. Look at the immediate interior of the bay. You're being left out of the excessive heat warning, but you're not out of this entirely because you have a heat advisory. A lower grade on the wording. The intensity of the heat's not going to be as high. That's obvious if you're in the bay. But there are two other things that are helping out the bay, or at least the immediate bay shore, so that you don't have the excessive heat warning and you've just got the heat advisory. One of them you could see on Sunday afternoon. See the clouds in the marine layer back there. But can you see what's still streaming in? There's no clouds here. But there is still very much a marine layer there. You can kind of see the mist. It's really subtle to see it, and we're time-lapsing this, so we're playing it really fast. But that is cooler air being compressed by the center of high pressure over us, so it's really low, but it's still there, and it is still streaming into the bay. And that is going to spare anybody in the city and the immediate opening to the Golden Gate from the worst of this heat. And we're going to put all the numbers on this in 1 second. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork for why different parts of the bay, obviously, have very different stories in terms of the way this heat wave is going to play out. The heat risk map also shows a fascinating pattern here. This is Wednesday. Tuesday and Wednesday are kind of like peak heat, but they're both almost identical. So when we see Tuesday's numbers on the floor map in a second, they pretty much apply to both days. Look at the areas in purple on there. So the key up there shows you that's where we're getting into a very high degree of risk to heat-related health impacts. And it's counterintuitive to see that's all in the mountains. Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range, above 1,000 feet, actually have the highest risk in this heat wave. And why would that be? We're all taught at a young age, you go up into the mountains, it gets cooler the higher you go. And that is true in general, except here in the bay, where that marine layer, which we were just looking at, all that cool air squashed down here low to the ground, this is like an insulating blanket of help. If you get above it, and at this point, really, you only need to go up like 700 feet, and then you're above it, it is a lot warmer up here. than it is down under that barrier within the marine layer. The problem is when that marine layer is so low, now it cannot get inland. It cannot get over the East Bay Hills, and it certainly can't get up to our mountaintops, where the temperatures are really going to be spiking as a result, because at elevation, you can think of you are experiencing what the broader atmosphere really wants to be doing right now to the bay. However, you can remain somewhat blissfully oblivious to that if you are lucky enough to live within the marine layer, which is this really unique little shield that most of us have here in the bay. But most of us in the bay area as a whole are inland. And you're going to be at risk from this. There's a greater population center in the immediate bay. But most of us who really need to be paying attention to this story the most, obviously, are inland. So just a couple of reviews before we get to the actual numbers. What's the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke? Because these are words that will get used in terms of heat-related health impacts. This is what we're talking about every time we show that map. Well, what exactly are the heat-related health impacts? A huge important distinction between these two. If it's heat exhaustion, the symptoms over here are manageable. If it's heat stroke and you're experiencing the symptoms over here, it's an entirely separate degree of concern, and you really want to monitor those. Because if you notice things like a throbbing headache, not just, kind of faint, maybe a little lightheaded. If you get a throbbing headache, that's symptom number one to really watch. Also, no sweating. In other words, it was hot, you were sweating, and then all of a sudden you stopped sweating. Nothing else changed, you just stopped. If you get any of those symptoms, at that point it's time to call 911, because heat stroke is very serious. Heat is the number one killer of any weather-related item. Heat's the number one killer. This is why we make a bigger deal out of this. I'm not trying to go into dramatics on this, but I am really trying to drive home the point. It's the first heat wave of the year, and this one's going to be a long duration thing for us to all kind of start settling into the notion of kind of taking it serious and going easy on ourselves, checking on people who you know in your neighborhood who maybe don't have air conditioning. Think of those who are maybe a little more compromised, the elderly, and making sure you're checking on them. Before I talk about the red flag warning, let's talk about the numbers, because that really is the headline. It took me forever to get to this. But here's the takeaway, and we're going to do this. You can pick out your part of the bag. These are the daytime highs on Monday. So for Monday, you're like 3 to 6 degrees warmer at this point than you were on Sunday. It's just a gradual bump in numbers. Some of us are close to 100, so you've already noticed the warm-up taking place, but we're not really at the intensity of the heat wave yet, so we're going to lose those, and now we're going to go to Tuesday's daytime highs. And remember, Tuesday and Wednesday, these are the peak. Now pick out your numbers. I think the one that really grabs the headlines is the 111 in Concord. That's the highest one. That really, oh wow, I think that's the one that really grabs a lot of people's attention for sure. Just to hear 111. We'll be 106 in Livermore. San Jose, you'll be 98. Look at Redwood City at 100. So that covers the daytime high on Tuesday. Remember, Wednesday's pretty close to this, but I want to come back over towards this part of the bay in particular. Because if those are your daytime highs on Tuesday, and we already know Wednesday you're pretty much going back to the same spot, in addition to the long duration of this heat wave sticking around for potentially the next 10 days or so, maybe even longer, much more needs to be resolved on that. But we do know it's going to be a long duration event. In addition to that, the morning lows are also a challenge because we're not getting enough of a break in the overnight hours. So you're only going down to 75 degrees in the morning in Antioch. That's it. That's as cool as you're going to get. That actually is a significant number because, well, you think 75 degrees, what's the big deal? But you're not getting the chance to really recuperate from the heat of the day before you then have to rush headlong into another day at 110 plus temperatures. Look at Redwood City. You will cool down into the mid-60s. That's 10 degrees cooler than Antioch's going to be, and that helps. So when we're talking about why the Bay's got the heat advisory, obviously the daytime highs aren't as high, but you're also getting the recovery in the overnight hours, which does help a great deal, especially during long-term and long-duration events like this. Okay, that covers the heat. We're going to do 7-day forecast as well here coming up in a bit, so you can kind of get the picture. But before we get to the 7-day forecast with more numbers, we just need to talk about the fire weather threat from this, because there is an added element from that standpoint. So the red flag warning has been issued primarily for the northern Sacramento Valley. It does include part of Solano County, and it includes Lake County. This is Monday through Wednesday. And of course, if we remove that and visualize why, look at the winds. Those are northerly winds going down the Sacramento Valley. That's classic for our offshore wind events. When you see northerly winds like this, that tends to dry the atmosphere more as they work their way offshore, and that's where you start to compound the issue from a fire threat and concern. So the time frame on that red flag warning takes us through Wednesday, which is okay. I mean, that's good that it's not going super long, but we know the 4th of July is coming up this week. And the 4th of July is an added element of liability and concern from a wildfire start standpoint. And there was an interesting paper actually that was just released on that, which kind of shows us one aspect of how the 4th of July plays a really obvious role in the numbers of wildfires that get started in the country. It's a busy looking graph behind me. I just want to give you a little explanation on this. You're looking at the course of a year. Every day gets a bar. The black bars show you the fires that are started by human activity throughout the year. By the way, 70,000 wildfires in general get started throughout the country as a whole in a year. It's a big number. Very few of them make headlines. The tan bars on there show you the ones that start from natural consequences. You've probably already picked out the story here. July 4th, there is a very notable spike in wildfire starts. And it's not just July 4th, it's the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. There are 3 black bars on there. They're very thin, so you maybe can't see all 3. But there's such a huge pattern there in terms of the foolishness. That's almost all coming from the non-official, non-sanctioned people who are just having fun with fireworks. Look at the visual snapshot. When you step back and look at all the wildfire starts in this country throughout the year, that is the biggest point in the year from a liability of wildfire starts. Not to mention, it also does a number on air quality here at home in the Bay. That graph was for the nation as a whole, but every year, on the morning of July 5th, without fail, the air quality goes way down. There's a lot of particulate matter, so keep that in mind too as we get to July 4th. Okay, 7-day forecast. Concord, we already kind of put a spotlight on your numbers. You do get some help back here. We're going to bring you down into the low hundreds by the time we get to Friday and Saturday. This is what I mean when we say we're really looking at the long duration of this event. Let's go to the North Bay. Santa Rosa, your numbers are not quite as high. You'll go to 106, and it's kind of like North Bay representatives here. So this is not just Santa Rosa. I think most of the North Bay communities. And then you actually see a little bit of an uptick again going into the weekend. Not as hot as Tuesday and Wednesday, but after a subtle reprieve going into Thursday, once we get towards next weekend, the numbers are just going to start climbing there. Let's come into the Bay. We'll do the South Bay now. San Jose, you're going to 98 at the top. Let's check in the records here. The record for San Jose on Wednesday's date is 103. So these are not record daytime highs, but look how long you're staying there. And you'll still be in the mid-90s by the time we get to Saturday. Let's do this now for Oakland. It's all of a sudden it's going to look better now. But if you live in Oakland, you know that those numbers grab your attention. 92 for the daytime highs here. You are in the heat advisory. Your morning lows will be great. You'll get a nice break in Oakland. So will San Francisco. And we're just going to kind of finish out the tour with the microclimate, which always brings up the rear and covers one of the more extreme microclimates in terms of cooler temperatures. And you'll be in the mid-80s in the city. Doesn't sound nearly as bad, but if you live in the city or spend much time there, you know 85 is a notably warm day. You'll be back in the upper 70s by the time we get back towards Saturday and Sunday. This is an unfolding event. We wanted to do this long format visit with you just to make sure you've got all the information before it starts. But of course, we're going to track this in great detail over the course of the week. Jessica Birch will be on it in the mornings. Paul Hagan will be covering it in the evenings, and then I'll be in later in the week as well as we get into the holiday. Thanks for checking in on this one.